So, this is the new book from Time Life. It's called The Modern Day Conspiracy Theories Inside Mysterious Deaths, Dirty Tricks, and Secret Plots. And last time we read, I guess, an introduction into uh, into what a conspiracy theory was, and this beginning section is similar in that it's just giving some definitions before I guess we get into the actual conspiracy. So this section is called the Deep State. Forget of by and for the people. Deep state theorists warn our elected leaders aren't the ones actually in charge. So I guess this section is more about the concept of the secret cabal, the sort of behind the scenes government. Some conspiracists worry about suppression at the hands of global elites. Others look closer to home. Some theorists maintain that the real power in the United States rests with a parallel secret government organized by the U.S. military and intelligence agencies, with support from private business interests. In this view, the deep state exists independent of elections and often works to derail popular movements such as the Arab Spring uprisings that began in the Middle East in 2010. How else, conspiracy theorists ask, would Egypt have returned to military rule so quickly after the old regime was overthrown? The existence of deep state conspiracists believe would also explain why such an outsized proportion of the United States federal budget is devoted to defense spreading, and why it was necessary in 2015 to pass legislation curbing the National Security Agency's authority to collect the phone records of millions of Americans. Some very high placed officials have appeared to support the idea of a deep state. In his 1961 farewell address to the nation, President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned Americans to be vigilant against what he famously called the military industrial complex. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry, he said, can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Many theorists think a state within a state emerged in November 1961 when newly elected President John F. Kennedy authorized a covert plan to topple the communist regime in Cuba. According to Peter Dale Scott, who has written multiple books on conspiracies, among them The American War Machine, Deep Politics, The CIA Global Drug Connection, and The Road to Afghanistan, and Deep Politics and the Death of JFK. The deep state has become so powerful that even U.S. presidents can no longer challenge it. Scott describes a contingency plan ironically first established by Eisenhower during the Cold War to prevent a power vacuum in the event of a national emergency. This continuity of operations plan defines who takes charge in the event of a nuclear attack or other catastrophic situation and designates secure facilities for various So the images that they have here. So this is the first one, if you remember from a couple of years ago. The Arab Spring was what it was labeled in the press. A defiant protester in Cairo waved the Egyptian flag as soldiers threw stones from a rooftop during the 2011 Arab Spring. And then up here, it is an older image of President Dwight D. Eisenhower presented his farewell address to the nation. According to some, including biographer Jeffrey Perret, Eisenhower originally intended to warn against the military-industrial congressional complex, and the word congressional was dropped to appease officials. So that's interesting. I didn't even know that. So it wasn't just the military industrial complex, but Congress was also involved, which makes sense because, all of the senators and congressmen that are in both houses, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, most of their campaigns are funded by, not just local people who are trying to help them, but also by companies, just like, major funding occurs for the presidency campaigns, and favors and different things could be requested afterwards. So it would make sense that it would be the military industrial congressional complex, but I guess Congress felt that people would become a little bit too concerned that everybody was in somebody's pocket, which essentially they are. But I guess they didn't want to seem like that because it would affect their image. But I think by this point, most people are aware of that. So back to this Arab Spring situation. So, as far as the conspiracy theories go about that, I think one of the best documentaries that I saw, not about specifically the Arab Spring. This documentary was about the news organization Al Jazeera, and they had just a little section talking about the initial Iraq invasion, where the military and basically Iraq was kind of taken over within a couple of days. Really, it wasn't like a particularly drawn out situation on the news. We suddenly saw people screaming in the streets, and we saw Saddam's a statue being torn down, and there were like all of these very graphic and impressive images that came across our television screens right in that early period of the war. I know the war itself was an extended, kind of a never-ending situation, but the takeover, that initial breakdown of the government, that was relatively fast. There was a lot of hype about, how it was going to be a major situation and that there were going to be retaliations. But the government takeover, the sort of throwdown of this government, the Hussein government, was relatively fast. And so what the Al Jazeera documentary, mentioned in that, the reporters that were talking, they said when they were watching it, because these were Iraqi reporters, sitting there and watching this stuff, the same stuff we were watching, they were watching it on their screens too. And they were all huddled in their houses because nobody was, everyone is told not to go outside because obviously it's dangerous. There's looting and there was a major situation. But they were sitting there, and what they noticed, what American audiences would not have realized, was the fact they said, who are these people that are, tearing down Saddam's statue? That are these like big, healthy guys, these strong guys that are running around in the streets when there is the message had gone out to the citizenry that you're supposed to stay in your houses. Who are these guys that are outside breaking the statues? Number one. Two, they said, how come their flags are from the 1980s, meaning these were not commonly found Iraqi flags. They had specific flags that were from, I guess, the printout that had come out in the early 80s. So these young guys who would have been children at that time had a very specific flag that they were mounting on different places, and those reporters, because they're from Iraq, realized that. And I thought that was really interesting because to us, to American viewers, it didn't seem significant. We just thought it was an Iraqi flag, and those were Iraqi people, and so nobody questioned it. But the people who were actually living in the country did question it because they knew that nobody was supposed to be outside. Number one, and two, where were they getting these very old flags from? These flags that were not commonplace. So they felt that they had been handed these things in order to create these kind of iconic images of these statues being torn down. They even said it was strange that they had the ability to break a statue like that, just by, I think he was just pounding it with what looked like some sort of a sledgehammer. So they felt that it was already even severed somewhat, meaning it was all done for show, that it was staged. It was somewhat a staged performance for the cameras that was there. What they believed was happening as they were watching it on their screens. But they had a little bit of evidence behind it because it seemed strange to them that there was a situation going on supposedly right outside their doors when nobody was allowed out, and that the flags were old. So anyway, just based on that little segment in the documentary, I remember hearing, or I think I was reading it on Facebook, about how people were saying similar things that were living in those same countries where the Arab Spring was occurring. There were numerous people, like I do follow a lot of these conspiracy sites, so that's where I was reading it, but there were numerous people from those same countries that were saying that this was a CIA stage situation because most of the real people that were living there weren't leaving their homes because it was so dangerous to go outside. So they were questioning who were these people rioting in the streets, and it was like a very similar, what they were saying was very similar to what I had heard by that Iraqi reporter when she was describing what she was seeing in Iraq so many years prior. It made it seem like there were some staging events, and what this particular author also mentioned was the fact that how is it possible that the old regime was taken down so quickly and instantly replaced by a military, almost like a military coup, like it just happened overnight. So they find that questionable, like how was it organized so quickly? Because usually in a real riot situation, there's chaos, there is no organization, but there were people ready to step in and a system was already in place. So that's where the questionable, what's really going on here. And I think that there was probably a shift in power within those particular countries. Now, what that really was about, was it a banking issue? Was it a military issue? I don't really know. Was it something that was funded behind the scenes? We'll find out probably in a couple of years. There'll be more information that gets released about it, but that's something that has happened in recent history that people, because it's happening so far from their homes, don't really question. But it was weird how it just suddenly occurred. It was like one country after another. Just it was a strange situation, and the fact that the military was ready to go to fix this, so supposedly fix the situation, which I don't think they did. But the fact that there was an organized situation happening behind the scenes, and ready to take the place of what had been torn down, I think that's kind of significant. I think a similar thing happened during World War One. That a lot of the old regimes across Europe and Russia were quietly dismantled. Not really quietly, I mean, there was a major war, but different families came into place, different people, the system got reorganized. It's kind of the beginning Eastern area and those various parties and the previous controllers were replaced, so to speak. And in terms of this other section about the continuity of operations, the continuity of operations is, it almost seems like a necessary, situation where you need to have a program in place so that the government doesn't get dismantled in the case of a catastrophe. So I understand why there would be need to place, to have that operation, some sort of a system working behind the scenes so that there's always somebody to look to in the case of a catastrophe. I don't remember which movie, if it was the alien invasion movie, or what it was, but I think it was Bill Paxton character was playing the president, and then, because they couldn't find him at the time, the next person in line, whether it was the vice president or it was the speaker of the house, like it goes down and there's a succession of people. Various people then become candidates to be the person in control, so that there's someone making decisions. So that, we've seen that in a couple of different movies, and there is a system. I think it's kind of necessary, but what this author is claiming is that what it is actually signifying is that there is a kind of secondary government behind the scenes. That what the continuity of operations actually signifies is that there is a behind the scenes unelected government that is quietly running operations, that always keeps the situation going, whether there's a catastrophe or not, that the front people are really just almost like puppets, or just like actors in the forefront. But behind the scenes, there's a whole other group of people that are never elected. If you've seen the Netflix show House of Cards, you get a glimpse of that behind the scenes government with the party whip and the various, the various behind the scenes dealings. They're not elected by the public, but they wield a tremendous amount of power. They're elected, I guess, by their parties, and there's, some form by which they get into those positions, but the public is not directly involved with them. Yet the public is affected by those decisions because they affect the decisions that the politicians make. So it's an interesting situation. There obviously has to be a behind the scenes organization, but it can become very dangerous, as President Eisenhower was suggesting that be very careful about this complex, the military industrial congressional complex. So we have to add the congressional element, that it's all of these different levels of government that can have a sort of powerhouse behind the scenes, running everything, making decisions, never really being elected, and never really getting blamed when things go awry, because they can make wrong decisions too. It's the front guys, the people that we see on the news every day. They're the ones who kind of go through the circus, but there's some circus master behind the scene, kind of with a whip, making all of these decisions and forcing people to do one thing or another. So, and we've seen that in a lot of different movies. That there's this sort of behind the scenes government, and it's interesting that they say that the assassination of President Kennedy was really when this came into full placement, because if you remember, there were a lot of quotes of Kennedy that made it seem like he was going to make an effort to expose the various secret societies, or really just to expose the kind of covert activities of the CIA was this secret kind of cabal within the government itself that, after they got rid of one of their main opponents, they made sure that subsequent presidents after that point were never able to touch them, and that they were able to make decisions quietly on their own and kind of run the government from behind the scenes. There's a documentary that I think came on Frontline. It was about the wiretapping situation, and although Edward Snowden seemed to be somebody who revealed that that's not actually true, the wiretapping scandal, and I know that Frontline story came out way before Snowden did, and way before Julian Assange or any of these people released their information. That wiretapping scandal was much older, but it revealed right at the time that they were talking about it, and I think it was the Washington Post that had released the stories, that there were secret negotiations and almost like secret deals made that allowed for the wiretapping not only to occur, but that the president and vice president were, and whoever those officials were that were involved with it, that they were protected under these secret agreements. And that's a very good documentary, that Frontline documentary about the wiretapping. It really does explain a lot of the secret NSA situations and how it occurred, like in the very early days, that there was a computer program that was particularly dangerous, and there was one that was relatively benign, and they decided to use the more dangerous program that was pulling information from all people, from all interactions on cell phones and emails and so forth, rather than the more benign version of it, which I think was functioning previously. So that's what that documentary is about, and the fact that when these various people from the NSA were trying to complain about it, and were not openly whistleblowing, but were sort of whistleblowing because they were quietly giving information to the Washington Post, they were met with a situation where they found out that all of those various conspirators, or the various people behind the scenes, were all protected, or they felt that they were protected by very kind of sneaky legal agreements that allowed for this kind of thing to happen. Whether it's true or not, I don't really know, but I think that in the documentary they even admitted to the fact that they're fully protected by these by this secret legislation. So that really does give some credence to this concept that there's a secret organization that not only makes decisions but has protections against any kind of lawsuits or any sort of situation that they could be penalized. So that makes it extremely dangerous that they not only are kept secret, but that they are protected under some sort of secret laws. What are these laws, and why are they not made public? Because obviously the public would retaliate against it, because it would completely remove the issue of not only checks and balances, but of allowing the public to have some sort of say in what their leadership does. And it's kind of a dangerous situation. It occurred right after 9/11, so it's understandable that they wanted things in place, but at the same time, those legal wranglings were already done, meaning prior to 9/11, they had gone through the legal processes to ensure their safety. So that's even more questionable, that how come all of this stuff was already set up so that when the event did occur, those laws were ready to go through. So that documentary, if a person gets a chance, I'll have to look it up, what the name of it, but it was a Frontline interview, about a documentary on the wiretapping scandal. And I think it kind of exposed this secret military-industrial complex, this same thing that President Dwight D. Eisenhower was warning the American public lives. So